One of the earmarks of a civilized society is the ability to articulate and communicate. In other words, we have words, and those words have meanings, they have definition. And as long as you use the words within their assigned definition, you don't have confusion. But as soon as you start changing what words mean, now all of a sudden, no one has any idea what anyone else means. We need to talk about this in light of politics, pop culture, and yes, I'm even going to mix in some theology. And how about some common sense and logic, too?
Let's get ready to rumble! You can't handle the truth. Somebody with the top of the line.
I think everyone understands and everyone agrees, no matter their political ideology or persuasion, that we are in the midst of a culture war right now. That there's a lot happening in our nation and even around the world where we are seeing the culture literally redefined before our eyes. And depending upon what your ideology is, you're either embracing this, or you are fighting against this, or you are standing in the middle of it all, scratching your head saying, how did we get here? Why are we here? I don't want to be here. So let's talk about this from the aspect of the transgender argument, which, again, when you start to look at it in light of what we see happening, in particular in college sports, men transitioning to be females to then compete in women's athletics, and the evidence is beyond overwhelming at this point that the guys who become women have an incredibly off the charts, unfair physical advantage over the quote biological females which they are competing against. That said, the right was ridiculed a couple of weeks ago during the SCOTUS interview process of Ninja Sanji Brown to the United States Supreme Court when she was asked, hey, what's a woman? And she said, I can't define that. And of course, Saturday Night Live immediately went after Representative Washburn for asking that question. And, you know, of all the things facing our country, why would you ask that? And she's there to interpret the law, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, there you go, because right now, we're going to start having a lot of court cases involving this idea of gender identity. And everything from using of restrooms to hiring practices to even our engagement of bringing people into the military down to high school sports. So it's a pretty basic question. What is a woman? Matt Walsh, who is a conservative political commentator, he has a daily podcast on The Wire, about 2 weeks ago went on with Dr. Phil to debate two individuals and a professor over the issue of gender identity. Now, there is something I would like to say about those individuals, but of course, that could get me in trouble. It could be deemed as offensive, because again, we don't like the fact that there are words that have concrete definition. For example, the word perversion. Perversion simply means to take something that has been accepted and is considered by the overwhelming vast majority, this is the norm. This is what everything from science to common sense to human tradition says, this is the norm. And when you act outside of it and you twist it and you turn it, you have perverted it, you have twisted it, you have contorted it. But of course, you can't say that because you'll offend somebody. You'll get in trouble. The same when you say someone is a deviant. You can't say that. Well, it means a deviation from the norm. For centuries, we considered that a human being engaging in sexual contact with an animal would be considered a deviant behavior, a perversion. We would say the same thing about an adult engaging in practices with children. And if you even began to continue to use that word in reference to male on male or female on female intimate contact, you were immediately labeled a hate monger. You were blasted. They would go after you. They would try to censure you. But I said years ago when I first began doing this, if you accept what they're bringing in under the guise of we just want equality and the right to marry, once you accept that, you have to accept everything. And right now we've got transgendered individuals reading stories to 4-year-olds in libraries because they understand that for the vast majority of thinking adults in the world, this whole trans fluid argument, it doesn't make any sense because, again, it goes against the very concept, the very foundation that to be a skilled, cultured society, you have communication. You have words. Words have definitions. And when you start changing it, you do nothing but create confusion. Well, because they have got all this confusion now, what they've set their sights on are the children. They'll just reprogram the children, which is why they want the educational agenda that they want, that governors like Ron DeSantis are fighting against. You're not going to sexualize kindergartners and first graders and second graders and third graders, etc., etc., etc. But they understand on the other side, the only way they can, quote, change the definition and change the interpretation and literally change the culture, they've got to infect the young minds. So Matt Walsh went on Dr. Phil and he engaged in this debate with two different thinking individuals and a professor. You might as well say three different thinking people. And he began with a simple question. What is a woman?
Well, this is one of the problems with this left-wing gender ideology, is that no one who espouses it can even tell you what these words mean. Like, what is a woman?
Well,
can you tell me what a woman is?
No, I can't. Because it's not for me to say. Womanhood looks different for everybody.
What do you define a woman as?
An adult human female.
And what does a female mean?
Well,
how
that's
do you define a female?
someone with female reproductive organs.
Okay.
Someone who's, here's the thing, when you're female, it goes right down to your bones, your DNA. So that's why if someone dies,
okay,
we could dig up their bones 100 years from now. We have no idea what they believed in their head, but we can tell what sex they were because it's ingrained in every fiber of their being.
So let me see if we can get this straight. I identify as a woman. Well, what is that? I don't know. I can't tell you what a woman is. I can only tell you what a woman is for me. So in other words, we're now not only going to say we have trans fluid genderism, but apparently we can have now trans definition of words. Think about that. We're going to have trans definition of words. I'm going to get a little theological here with you for just a moment. In the book of Genesis, we have the biblical account of the creation of man. And Adam and Eve were placed in the Garden of Eden. And it was there that Satan, in the form of a serpent, came and he laid out a temptation to Eve. And that temptation process, which began in the Garden of Eden, it still continues to this day. What was it that Satan did to engage Eve in this idea that she could do something which she had been clearly told, do not do this? The serpent, in the form of a mocking question, said, "Yea, hath God said." Did God really say that? Did God really mean that? That if you eat of this fruit, you will surely die? Did God really say that? Did God really mean that? In other words, we talk about this in theological circles, that heresy begins when we start taking accepted doctrine and we start questioning, saying, "Yea, hath God said." But that can even be carried over into the secular world, into the physical world, the natural world, when we take laws, when we take what we call the normative process of literally tens of thousands of years and recorded human history, and we start asking, well, is that really what a woman is? Is that really what it's about? When we start changing the definition, see, you can't change the reality. You're either born a boy or you're born a girl. That is fact. You either have one set of genitalia or you have a different set of genitalia. It's either XXXY. That's fact. But if you're going to start creating this idea that there are other genders out there, you can't deal in facts. You have to start dealing in feelings. You have to start dealing in emotions. And so you have to start redefining, twisting, contorting, perverting the verbiage, the language, and the definitions thereof. So this individual basically goes on to say that, well, a woman is whatever you want it to be.
You stood up here and said trans women are women.
Yes.
Tell me what you mean. What is a woman?
Womanhood is something that, just as Ethan explained, I cannot define because I am not
But
myself.
you used the word. So what did you mean when you said trans women are women if you don't know what it means?
Right? So here's the thing. So I do not define what a woman is because I do not identify as a woman. Womanhood is something that is an umbrella term. It includes people
That
who
describes what?
people who identify as a woman.
Identify as what?
As a woman.
What is that?
Was to each their own. Each woman, each man, each person is going to have a different relation with their own gender identity and define it differently.
That doesn't-
And so
I'm not
trans
asking for
women are women too.
Now, Matt Walsh does a great pushback here when he basically says, no, it's not about feeling. It really is about science. You either are or you aren't.
Well, that's got nothing to do with the reality. So you can feel however you want. I mean, I could sit here and say that I feel like a tomato plant, but that doesn't mean that I'm actually in those things. So your self-perception, you can have whatever self-perception you want, but you can't expect me to take part in that self-perception or to take part in this kind of charade, this theatrical production. You don't get your own pronouns, just like you don't get your own prepositions or your own adjectives. You know, it's like if I were to tell you, my adjectives are handsome and brilliant. And whenever you're talking about me, you have to describe me as handsome and brilliant because that's how I identify. It makes no sense. You don't get your own pronouns. That's grammar, that's language.
So at this point, Dr. Phil interjects here and he wants to know, well, what do you think that these people are that don't think the way you think? Is there something wrong with them? Well, may I respond to that, Dr. Phil? Well, duh. I mean, seriously, duh. Can anybody see us just a couple of years ago even entertaining any of this? Even opening this up to quote-unquote serious thought or debate? I mean, the more we keep tweaking and changing, and I'll get into the theological reasons why this is being done in just a few moments. But again, I love Matt's pushback here. And yeah, he does kind of get into, well, look, these people are either deluded, they're mental, or they're confused. You know, kids can get kind of confused.
Yeah, I think it's delusion. It could be mental illness. It could be it's a lot of different things. With children,
Wow.
you know, there's also just a basic confusion that all kids have. Like that's why when you hear a parent say, "Oh, my 4-year-old son came to me and said that I'm a girl now, and so that's what I'm gonna raise him as a girl." No, you're a 4-year-old. I have 4 kids. When a 4-year-old boy comes to you and says, "Oh, I'm a girl," here's a good follow-up question. What is a girl? Ask him what he means by that. What do you mean by girl? And when you ask him that, here's what he'll tell you. He will tell you what he really means is that he wants to do some of the things that girls do, like play with the dollhouse, or you know, he likes the color pink. That's fine, play with the dollhouse. But you're still a boy.
You know, I love when he said earlier, hey, look, you know, I can't just pick adjectives that are mine, genius and handsome, and enforce that everyone use them when talking about me. If your feelings are your feelings in an area, fine, they can be yours. That doesn't mean they have to become accepted truth that everybody else must then participate in your delusion, your confusion. By the way, when I raised 4 kids, I have 2 boys, 2 girls. I have a son who's in the United States Navy. He is a cadet at Annapolis at the military academy. I have a son who is an assistant pastor in Washington, D.C. I have a daughter who's married. I have another daughter who is not yet married, but she is dating someone. And I can tell you that when they were little, they played with each other's toys. My boys clearly understood that there were times they didn't mind sitting down and playing whatever their sisters wanted to play, which was usually, you get out your G.I. Joes, and I'll get out my Barbie, and they played. And it was fine. Now, I understand that the idea of the roles of what genders are allowed to do today is different than it was, say, 100 years ago. We understand that a woman doesn't have to, quote, just be a housewife. She is actually very capable of being a captain of industry, of doing things beyond what 100 years ago would have been considered, this is what boys do, this is what girls do. Got it. Now, there are certain things that, to be quite honest, when we talk about physical ability, obviously one gender has a distinct advantage over the other gender. But again, just because somebody wants to do something that was at one time considered, well, a woman can't own her own business. Well, yeah, actually she can, but that doesn't mean that to own her own business, now she has to identify as a man. And yet, this is where the transgender argument has gone. And of course, now they want to make it about, well, the gender that you're born with, well, that's not permanent. And to think that way, that's extreme.
This idea of giving children in age-appropriate ways an understanding that these things aren't set in stone. Gender identity is not tied to biology.
You say that gender's not set in stone.
It's not.
What do you mean?
I mean that's just factually incorrect saying that. So you have biology is the chromosomal makeup and reproductive organs and all of that. And so that would be sort of the nature side of things. But the nurture side of things is where we see more of gender identities.
She began by saying that my view is extreme. Okay, so the view that every single person on Earth has held up until 15 seconds ago is extreme, and the view that almost everyone does right now still hold is extreme, apparently, according to her. But there is this they are conflating gender and sex, because on one hand they say, well, you got your biological sex, but then your gender is whatever social construct. But then they turn around and say that trans women are women. So a man who identifies with the gender, the social construct of womanhood, actually is a woman. So if you can laugh all you want, but this is a logical problem. You are conflating sex and gender just by saying that. So that's the problem.
So did you see what they've done there? They've killed their own argument, because they want to say trans women are women, yet they can't identify or define what a woman is. But they will clearly state, well, there's a difference between a biological woman and a person who identifies as a woman emotionally, feelings-wise, their inner person. Okay, fine. So a dude declares himself a dudette, a female, a woman. But you have acknowledged there is a difference physically between someone born a male and born a female. So a male who decides he's female should then physically not be allowed to compete against physically born females. That's your own logic. Problem is, they can't accept the fact that truth is truth. You can't change the truth. You can toy with the definitions, you can put out the propaganda, you can put out all of your Lifetime specials, all of your movie characters, all of your characters in the new woke Disney productions, where we are supposed to start empathizing and sympathizing with people who want to identify as all kinds of things and same-sex attractions and unions, etc., 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 etc. But it does not change the truth from being the truth. And they are making children's minds the prey.
There's biological sex, and then there is gender identity. Part of me wants to ask why you care so much, because it's really not that big of a deal.
Can I answer that? I'd love to answer that question. I care about the truth. So basic truth matters. I want to live in a society where people care about the
fine.
truth and we're grounded in truth.
All right.
I care about children, and these insane ideas
do
about
too.
gender are being foisted on kids, and that bothers me quite a bit. I care about the women who are having their opportunities stolen from them. I care quite a bit. Yeah.
About
Why is this happening? Well, it's really, it's a theological, it's a spiritual reason. And I know some of you aren't necessarily believers. You might be conservative, which is why you watch me. But let me help you out where this stems from theologically. Satan at one time was an angelic being in heaven. In fact, he had the highest job in heaven as far as among the angelic realm. He was literally the worship leader of heaven. And Satan got a little caught up in himself. He realized that he was, in fact, the Bible says that he was the most beautiful of all the created angelic beings. And he got a little caught up in himself. You know, he was so beautiful. He was so this and he was so that. And he got it into his head in the book of Isaiah that he ought to be God. He ought to be sitting on the throne. He ought to be worshiped. He ought to be adored. He ought to have God's glory. And so he took 1/3 of the angels and they rebelled against God. And in that rebellion, they were thrown out of heaven. And he became the devil, and the third of the angels that went with him became the quote-unquote demons. Just so you understand that picture. It was after that that God created the world and God put man on earth. Man became God's highest creation. See, man was given something that the angels weren't given. The freedom to choose. The freedom of free will. Man was given that gift. And man was ultimately created in the image of God. That one day, the very essence of man, when he spends eternity with God, he will be, quote, glorified. Do you understand? For Satan, who saw himself as deserving of God's glory even more so than God, and wanting to place himself above God, to be thrown out of heaven, to be cursed, to be subjugated, and told that at some point he is going to spend eternity in hellfire and damnation. And yet here's man, the highest of all of God's creation. God had a special love for man, and being told that, men, if you stay in fellowship with God, one day you will spend eternity with God and you will be glorified. Do you understand? That about put Satan out of his mind. And so the one weapon he has left to try to, quote, hurt God is to absolutely pervert, corrupt, and destroy God's ultimate creation, man. To twist it, pervert it, and change it from what God intended man to be. And how do we know that? Just look around. Because we are living in a state where all of a sudden a group of people who literally make up less than 1% of the entire population now have all the power, all the control, and we're supposed to worry about them. And if you don't, you're extreme, because it's not about your safety, it's about their feelings.
I agree with my fellow Matt over here. Loudoun County is a famous case that the Daily Wire we helped uncover. There was a gender nonconforming boy in a dress who went into a girl's restroom and violently raped a young girl. After that happened, that's when the school district decided, oh, you know what? Now we're going to open up the restrooms and invite the boys in with the girls. Now, here's what happens. Because we hear a lot about, well, gender nonconforming people, transgender people, it makes them feel bad if they're not given access to the bathrooms they want. Well, okay, so they have their feelings. What about the feelings of the girls who are getting raped? There are many girls and many women who are speaking out and saying, we want privacy in our facilities. We don't want a man in the bathroom with us. And then what we hear
Most
from
people
what we hear
want
from this
privacy
side,
in the bathroom.
what we hear from this side.
I did not say that we want open bathrooms where anyone can go in.
What we hear from this side is that, well, their feelings don't matter. We're not going. Who cares? You just have to deal with it, right? Because the transgender people, the gender nonconforming people, it's their feelings that take priority.
I'm not trying to minimize your concern around it, but I don't know that it's a safety issue. And you usually still have another bathroom that you can go to.
It's a safety issue. My daughter would not feel safe or secure if she had to share a bathroom or a gender-neutral locker room with boys.